The story of the United States Declaration of Independence is not a single, dramatic moment frozen in time, but the culmination of decades of tension, evolving political identity, and a profound shift in how people understood power, rights, and governance. In the early 18th century, the 13 American colonies were firmly embedded within the imperial structure of the Kingdom of Great Britain. They were economically valuable and culturally connected to Britain, and many colonists still saw themselves as loyal subjects of the crown, yet beneath that surface, loyalty, a distinct colonial identity was slowly forming, one shaped by distance, local governance, and a growing sense of autonomy. This fragile balance began to break after the French and Indian War, a conflict that expanded British territory, but also left the empire deeply in debt. Seeking to stabilize its finances, Britain turned to the colonies as a source of revenue. The introduction of the Stamp Act marked a turning point, as it imposed direct taxation on everyday printed materials. It was followed by the Townshend Acts, which extended duties on imported goods. These measures triggered not only economic resistance, but a deeper constitutional argument. Colonists insisted that taxation without representation in Parliament was illegitimate. As protests intensified, cities like Boston became centers of resistance. The Boston Massacre transformed public opinion, as the killing of civilians by British troops was widely circulated as evidence of tyranny. Propaganda, speeches, and pamphlets amplified colonial grievances, shaping a shared narrative of injustice. When the Boston Tea Party took place, it was not merely an act of protest, but a calculated political statement, one that challenged the authority of Britain in a visible and irreversible way. Britain's reaction came through the Intolerable Acts, which aimed to punish Massachusetts and restore imperial control. Instead, these laws deepened colonial unity. Delegates gathered in the First Continental Congress, forging cooperation among colonies that had previously operated independently. By the time fighting broke out at the battles of Lexington and Concord, the conflict had already evolved beyond protest into organized resistance. The colonies were no longer simply arguing for rights within the empire. They were beginning to imagine a future outside of it. Even then, independence was not an immediate or unanimous goal. Many colonists remained cautious, hoping for reconciliation. However, as the war escalated and British policies grew more rigid, public sentiment shifted. Influential ideas from Enlightenment thinkers, especially John Locke, provided a philosophical framework for this transformation. Locke's assertion that governments derive power from the consent of the governed, and that people have the right to overthrow unjust rulers resonated deeply. These concepts reframed the colonial struggle not as rebellion, but as a legitimate defense of natural rights. In June 1776, the Second Continental Congress moved decisively toward independence by appointing a committee to draft a formal declaration. The responsibility fell primarily to Thomas Jefferson, whose writing combined clarity, logic, and rhetorical force, assisted by John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. Jefferson produced a document that would articulate both universal principles and specific grievances. The opening of the Declaration established a philosophical foundation that would outlive the conflict itself. It asserted that all men are created equal and possess inherent rights that cannot be taken away. This idea was radical not because it described reality, but because it set a standard against which all governments and societies could be judged. It introduced a moral dimension to politics, suggesting that legitimacy depends not on tradition or authority, but on justice and consent. The bulk of the document then presented a detailed case against King George III. Each grievance was carefully constructed to demonstrate a consistent pattern of abuse, dissolving legislative bodies, obstructing justice, imposing taxes without consent, maintaining standing armies, and interfering with colonial governance. Together, these accusations formed a legal argument that the British Crown had violated the social contract, thereby thereby justifying separation. On July 4th, 1776, in Philadelphia, the Declaration was formally adopted, marking the birth of the United States. This moment represented more than political independence. It was a redefinition of sovereignty itself. Authority would no longer flow from a monarch, but from the people. The act of signing the document carried immense risk, as it constituted treason against Britain. Yet the delegates proceeded, fully aware that failure could mean execution. Once adopted, the Declaration was widely distributed and publicly read, transforming it into a tool of mobilization. It unified the colonies under a shared purpose and communicated their intentions to the world. Internationally, it functioned as a diplomatic statement, seeking recognition and support. Its emphasis on universal rights appealed to foreign powers, particularly France, whose alliance would prove decisive in the eventual American victory. The Revolutionary War that followed was long and difficult, marked by uncertainty and sacrifice. Yet the ideas expressed in the Declaration sustained the cause, providing a sense of purpose that extended beyond immediate military concerns. When independence was finally secured, the document remained as a guiding framework for the new nation. However, the Declaration's legacy is inseparable from its contradictions. The assertion of equality did not extend to everyone. Enslaved individuals, Native Americans, and women were excluded from its promises, revealing a gap between principle and practice. Even so, the power of its language endured. Over time, reformers and activists would return to its words, using them as a foundation for expanding rights and challenging injustice. Figures such as Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King Jr. invoked the Declaration not as a finished achievement, but as a commitment yet to be fulfilled.
Men are created equal.
To date, preserved in the National Archives building, the Declaration of Independence stands as one of the most influential political documents in history. Its impact extends far beyond the United States, shaping revolutions, inspiring democratic movements, and redefining the relationship between governments and the people they serve. It continues to challenge each generation with a fundamental question: whether the ideals of equality, liberty, and self-governance can truly be realized in practice. In the end, the Declaration is both a beginning and an ongoing promise. It marked the birth of a nation, but more importantly, it introduced a vision of freedom, grounded in universal principles, an idea that continues to evolve, tested by history and carried forward by those who seek to bring its words closer to reality.